Hi everybody, welcome back to the Intercooler podcast, episode 265 with Dan Prosser and Andrew Frankel, and this is one of our icons episodes. We started doing these earlier this year, I think, and we pick out a single car or a single model line and go deep, and this time it's Lamborghini's V12 supercar, Miura, Countach, Diablo, Murciélago, Aventador, Revuelto.
That last one again?
Revuelto.
Very good.
Is that it?
Who knows?
I think it means scrambled in Spanish.
How do you pronounce the one between the Diablo and the Aventador?
No, I looked at this actually.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if it's Murciélago or Murciélago.
Nor do I.
But it's not a th.
Okay.
It's not Murciélago.
But we don't know whether it's Murcielago or Murciélago.
We don't.
So we're going to get this wrong relentlessly all the way through this podcast. We should know. We don't. I apologise.
Apologies. But that doesn't matter so much. Now, surely no supercar bloodline has adorned more bedroom walls than Lamborghini's V12 model line.
Ooh. Well, clearly there's only one possible alternative. So if you think Daytona, Boxer. Well, Daytona and Boxer, but then you get to Testarossa. I can't see many Testarossas on bedroom walls.
I think it's the Lamborghinis.
And then mid-90s, they got all sensible and started putting the engine back where it belonged in its 550s.
Yeah, that's not bedroom wall stuff.
It's not bedroom wall stuff, is it? No, because to go on the bedroom wall, it has to be mad.
It does.
And fair play to Lamborghini. They have been the greatest, most consistent purveyors of mad motor cars for the last 60 years.
Yeah.
And in fact, next year, I may about to be stealing your thunder, is the 60th anniversary of the launch of the Miura.
It is.
At Geneva.
It is.
In March. I've only just thought of that.
60 years almost of Lamborghini's V12 bloodline.
Yes.
Now, I'm glad you said that because during that time, Lamborghini has had just two V12 engines, which is amazing, right? So the first was a 60-degree V12 introduced on the first Lamborghini, the 350 GT.
Correct.
A Giotto Bizzarini engine, in use for almost 50 years.
It ended up in the very last Murciélago.
It did.
Murciélago.
And the way that engine evolved through those almost 50 years was amazing. Started out at 3.5 litres.
Ended up at 6.5.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not the same engine.
So let me just finish the point here because we'll come to that. From 280 brake horsepower to 670 brake horsepower.
Yes.
Dry and wet sump versions, 24 and 48 valve versions, carbs, fuel injection, all sorts of different equipment on it throughout those different years, right? Let me just jump in with this bit as well. So the new V12, also 60 degrees, introduced for the Aventador. But Lamborghini claims the Revuelto engine is new.
Despite having the same capacity, bore and stroke as the engine from the Aventador.
Exactly. And
we'll leave you to draw your own conclusions from that.
Well, that's it. And you look at how the first V12 evolved over the years, yet they define that as one engine. So surely this one, the Revuelto engine, is the same as the one in the Aventador.
If I was Lamborghini, I'd be trying to make that connection.
Yeah.
I would say, this engine has been, I don't know what word I would use. I might even say inspired by, or developed from. And then I go on to detail all the ways in which it was new. So you get both things. You get the historical context and the sort of the legacy effect, but you also get people understand that this is an essentially new engine. I wouldn't be trying to distance it from your heritage at all.
No. And it's nice that they've had two V12s.
Yes.
They would call it three. I don't know. Maybe it is three, but
it's not three.
It seems more like two, doesn't it? But how does it stand with you calling that first V12 one engine?
Well, the way that they will do it, and it's the reason that, for instance, the Chevrolet small block, which has been in production since the 1950s, they still claim, because I think you can still buy. There was a brand new one, but I think you can still buy crate engines from General Motors, made by General, of that. And they will say, the reason we can say it is the same is they'll measure the bore centers, the distance between the centers of each of the cylinders. And if that's the same, that is the generally accepted means of measuring and therefore proving that an engine's bloodline. And so my guess is that if you measured the bore centers of a 661 horsepower Murciélago 670S or whatever to a 350 GT from 1963, I imagine the bore centers would be the same.
Yeah.
Absolutely nothing else.
No.
Not a widget.
No.
But even so, that doesn't matter. I mean, it's like, it's like the Ferrari engine, the Colombo engine, which started life in 1947 as a 1.5 V12, ended up in a Daytona at 4.4 litres. And you could argue that got flattened into a into a flat 12 for the Boxer, which then became 5 litres. So where do you stop?
Yeah. Exactly.
I mean, it certainly
becomes very triggers broom, doesn't it?
It certainly went. And in fact, I think the stroke of the engine stayed from 1947 right up to the mid-60s, right up until the 275s came with a 3.3 litre engine. So I think the 1.5 litre engine and the 3 litre engine, although double the size with the same number of cylinders, had the same stroke.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. But we're talking about Lamborghinis.
Yes. But one of the points of that Bizzarini engine, and Bizzarini, who only died, I think, 2 years ago, at the age of 96. The point was, this is all part of Lamborghini's two-fingered salute to Ferrari. Because before Bizzarini's company was commissioned by Lamborghini to produce that engine, Bizzarini had been at Ferrari. He is generally regarded as the father of the 250 GTO. He was massively involved in iconic Ferrari racing cars like the Testarossa and the 250 short wheelbase. And he designed this engine to get back at Ferrari, which my understanding is that's one of the reasons it had 4 overhead camshafts, because the Ferrari engine only had 2.
Oh. So
it was like, see ya, Enzo.
There was a rumour that Ferruccio Lamborghini paid Bizzarini a bonus for every single horsepower over and above Ferrari's V12 that the Lamborghini V12 produced.
But back then, how did you prove it? A, all those engines would have come off with each engine, because the tolerances were nothing like they are today, with slightly different horsepowers. B, I think that in Italy 60 years ago, I don't think people were necessarily being too specific about the outputs of their engine. I mean, I read on that unimpeachable authority page called Wikipedia that Bizzarini told Lamborghini that his engine could produce 400 horsepower, but you'd need to rev it to 11,000 to do it. And Lamborghini probably went, actually not sure that's necessarily such a great idea, because it would have gone bang. But anyway, so who knows?
Who knows? But why did Bizzarini, did he want to get back at Ferrari, or was it just because he was being paid by Ferrari?
No, he wanted to get back at Ferrari too, because there had been this, march of the Ferrari top brass in 1961, when the situation at Ferrari got so difficult that so many people, really top engineers, walked out. They formed their own Formula One team for a bit called ATS, and there was no love lost at all. And so I suspect, and I don't know this, but I suspect that when Lamborghini went to Bizzarini, who by that stage started his own consultancy company, probably needed the business, and Lamborghini said, well, here's a bit of business, and the good news is you can, get back at Ferrari.
Perfect.
I imagine that Bizzarini would have bitten his arm off.
Yeah.
And the result was one of the most successful, enduring, and let's face it, frankly, wonderful engines that there's ever been.
Oh, it's cool, isn't it?
Yes, it is cool.
So this bloodline starts with the Miura in 1966.
Didn't replace, but the 350 GT came first. But you're talking about the mid-engine.
Yeah.
Nutcase ones.
Exactly. Yeah. And by then it was a 3.9 litre engine, roughly 345 to 380 horsepower later on.
On a very good day.
On a very good day, maybe. 764 Miuras built across the different variants. So it's there's not so many of those around. It's often said to be the first supercar. I just want to get into this quickly.
Ooh.
But you feel differently, don't you?
I'm not sure that I do. I know I have said. It's back to that bedroom wall.
Yeah.
And again, I think it is also symptomatic of the ages that we are, because although I was technically alive when the Miura was first shown, I wasn't paying much attention because I was 6 months old at the time.
You slacker.
But when the Countach came out in 1971 and actually went into production in 1973, by 1973 I was 8.
Yeah.
And so that's what went all over my bedroom wall. But the point, which is not specific to me, that that I have made before, is that I think that a supercar has to look mad to go on a bedroom wall. And this is the point I made in my Revuelto story, which you can read now. It's called In Search of the Supercar, isn't it? On the TI website and app. And this is the point that I made, is that it was Lamborghini who started that fantastic era of genuinely nutty-looking space-age cars with the Countach, and has basically continued it ever since. So in my heart, I would say it's the Countach. In my head, I'd say it's probably the Miura, although I've also can't really think of a reason why it's not the Mercedes 300 SL from 1954, because that did all the things that, traditionally you'd think a supercar would do. And it's only because I guess it's not quite the right, it's not for the brand that you'd expect it to be, and it still looked quite sensible, that somewhere in your head you think, well, yes, it ticks all the boxes, but still it's not quite there. Don't know.
Just as an aside, I always wonder why the Ford GT doesn't come up in this discussion. I know it's a racing car, but there were some road ones. When did they first arrive?
The GT, so the Mark III GT40, which was the road car. I can't remember. I wish I'd known you were going to ask me that, because I looked at how. I think it's a single-digit number of cars.
Is it? So that's probably why it doesn't count.
And they were terrible.
Okay.
I shouldn't say that, because I'm asking Ford if I can borrow theirs at the moment. No, they weren't terrible. They were just very compromised, because they've been designed as racing cars. They were very cramped. Because a GT40 isn't very spacious, and once you put chairs and that sort of thing in, you lose even more space. It had a centre gear change, whereas the car was designed to run with a right-hand gear change.
7 were built.
7.
Yes.
There you go. And I think it was regarded, and is regarded, and is rightly regarded, as an unsuccessful spin-off from a racing car program. It was never a production car in its own right. And if you think of all the cars that we've mentioned, from the 300 SL through to the Miura and to the Countach, these were absolutely, they were expensive and they were exotic, but these were production cars, actually made in whatever number they could sell.
Yeah.
And I think that's the reason.
Okay, fair enough. So back to the Miura then. One of the curious things about the Miura is that it has the transverse V12, so it's sideways rather than front to back.
Imagine getting to the spark plugs on the dark side of the engine.
Yeah.
You'd have to take out the seats. No, you wouldn't. You probably just have to. You might. I don't know, but I'd love to find out. Do you have to take out the engine to change the spark plugs on? To change 6 of the spark plugs on a Miura?
You probably would. I remember for Lamborghini's 50th anniversary, so that was 2011, 12, 13?
13.
Yeah,
13.
Yeah, you're right. It was 2013. So I did part of the tour with dozens, maybe a couple of hundred of other Lamborghinis through Italy. I did the stretch from Milan to Rome in a then new Aventador Roadster. Memorable trip. But one of the things I really do remember was driving into Rome on a very hot day in the traffic, in that dense Roman traffic, and all the old cars, particularly the Miuras and the Countaches, were just parked up at the side of the road with engine covers
by the side of the road. Yes.
But the Miura, I mean, it is a gorgeous car, isn't it? The shape and the proportions of that thing.
I still think it's the most. Do I think it's the most beautiful road car? Probably.
Oh, stunning.
I think it is. I saw one at actually a place well known to you, Shelsley Walsh. I think maybe actually when I saw you break the hill record.
I might be going back, by the way.
I am aware.
No.
Yes, the jungle drums have been beating.
Good, eh?
But and I can just remember, and it is one of those cars that you can never look at too much because it never becomes in any way, oh yeah, I know what that looks like. Move on. And when you see them moving, they take on an entire other dimension. It's not often you see a Miura moving.
No.
But I have. And obviously, you can go and watch the start of the Italian job and see one moving there. There was also an English series, I can't remember what it was, which wasn't shot that long ago, in which there was, I think, a blue Miura. And it's just, visually, it is within the road car, I don't know anything which gets near that.
No one's redone it. I know Lamborghini did a concept a few years ago, but no one has recreated
I'm really glad.
that shape.
I'm really glad.
I know, but it does seem like someone would have spotted that opportunity and tried to milk it for all it's worth.
I think the person who tries to out-Miura the Miura is a very, very brave person indeed. I think the chances of falling flat in your face, because it would only have to be not quite as good.
Yeah.
A kind of car that if the Miura didn't exist and you produced it, everyone would go, wow. But because the Miura does exist, everybody goes,
It doesn't look quite right.
It's like that Countach they did.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Unremarkable.
So I hope that nobody does it, because I wouldn't want anyone to go to that effort and have everyone like you and me turn around and go, what were you thinking of? How could you possibly think, how could you be so arrogant as to think that you could do better than that?
Yeah. Miura? Have you driven one?
I haven't.
Oh, interesting.
No. So maybe that's the thing to do for the 60th, isn't it?
Yeah, go drive one. Good idea. Well, get in touch, Miura owners.
Yes, all you Miura owners out there. Yes, I'd like an SV if that's all right. Possibly a Jota, if that wouldn't be too much problem.
Is there a colour you'd prefer?
Oh, well, orange. Isn't that the Miura colour? All that sort of.
Or the green.
I'm colourblind. What do I know?
Oh, that's true.
But they look amazing in pale blue as well.
Yeah, they do.
They look amazing in pale blue. Actually, I'm not sure I'd want an SV because. Little known fact about the SVs. The SVs were the sort of the third series. So there was the Miura, there was the Miura S, and the SV. And one of the most distinctive and, forgive the use of the words, iconic things about the Miura and the S were they had eyelashes.
Yeah.
And the SV lost the eyelashes.
I don't like the eyelashes.
I love the eyelashes.
No.
I think the eyelashes are absolutely brilliant. But I think the SV I think the SV is easily, and I haven't driven any of these, but my understanding is that the SV is easily the best of them because they were flawed cars, to say the very least, when they first came out.
They just got developed.
And they got developed. And I think by the time you got to the SV, I think it was actually a fairly well-sorted car by then, in a way that the originals simply weren't.
So the Miura was replaced by the Countach in 73. And that lived a long life, the Countach, until 1990, I think.
Yes.
And there are clearly several different versions of that car. It started with the 3.9 litre. It grew to 5.2 litres, 370 to 450 horsepower, 2049 built.
Yes. I think when you say 370 to 450, was it?
Yeah.
I think what you're talking about is a probably not very real 370 to a very real 450.
Okay.
I suspect that the first figure was somewhat inflated and that the second one absolutely wasn't, because by the time you got towards the end of the 80s, you couldn't play those games anymore.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. I mean, Ferrari were exactly. That's why during the Boxers production, it got less and less powerful on paper. So it started with, so the 4.4 had 380 horsepower. Engine goes up to 5 litres. Power comes down to 360. Engine then gets fuel injection, very efficient fuel injection. Power comes down to 330.
Go figure.
Go.
So the Countach is a Gandini design, and people often talk about the Countach's extreme styling. Outrageous.
So just before we do that, can we just quickly address the issue of who designed the Miura?
Oh, go on then.
Because it is one of the most disputed subjects in all of automotive history. I think the acceptance these days is that the car was started by Giugiaro, the brilliant Giorgetto Giugiaro, and was finished by Gandini.
Yeah.
I know our friend and TI contributor Peter Robinson would tell you that he has seen drawings of the Miura, which Giugiaro had supplied. So that is and I hope I'm not in any way, crediting someone or not crediting someone for something that they did. It was clearly a Bertoni car, but it was done. I think it was not a joint effort. I think Giugiaro started it and Gandini finished it. That is what I think, but I don't know.
Okay, but Gandini is certainly credited with the Countach.
Completely. And nobody, if you look at the design of it, nobody else could have done that.
No, you're right.
That is pure Gandini.
And people often talk about the Countach and its outrageous styling, but if you look at the very first Countach,
just beautiful.
It's actually
very clean,
quite
as well.
Minimalist, quite clean. It was over the years that it sprouted all these wings and
slats
and intakes and arches and all sorts, and it became a really messy looking car.
Do you? Well, you may have just answered the question. I was going to say, do you like all that stuff because it adds to the theatre? I mean, if you had your LP 5000, would you have the big wing? Would you have the Cannonball Run wing on the back?
No, I like them without the wing.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the earliest Countach is the prettiest.
I am the same. Have you seen them with the wing on the front?
Yeah, I have. Yeah, that's really odd.
That's really, really odd.
There were some weird things going on, weren't there? So we did drive a Countach a couple of years ago, 5000S.
Yes.
Thanks to our friends at Girardeau. So it's the only one I've driven, and it's just cool, just so cool to be in a Lamborghini of that era. In terms of sense of occasion, what comes close?
It's up there with the F40, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I've not driven one of those.
No, but it is that kind of, if you've done this job for long enough, you tend to sleep quite well, even the day before you're going to drive something quite nice. But it is one of those cars which you just might wake up at 2:00 in the morning and struggle to get back to sleep because you know what's coming. And it's all about the sense of occasion, isn't it?
Yeah.
As much of the driving experience, although that car was because I've driven two, both 5000Ss, one terrible, which poisoned my view. It shows the danger of driving cars long after they were built.
Yeah.
And not knowing why they are that way, and whether it is down to do with the fact that that's just the way they were, or because that car may not have been looked after very well. But I've driven Daytonas. We drove Max Girardeau's Daytona, which was the third Daytona I've driven, and I've driven three Daytonas. I've driven a really bad one, I've driven a quite nice one, and I've driven an absolutely epic one, which you've driven, which was Max's car. And it just goes to show. But the point was with the 25000, the first one I drove was not good at all and poisoned my view of the car. I thought it was always, for 20 years, I thought it was the most overrated of all supercars. And then, as you said, we went to Girardeau's place and drove that white 5000S. And I thought it was enchanting.
It's actually, you need to be very careful, don't you? Leaping to assumptions on the basis of one car.
Yes.
But sadly, Countaches aren't lining up exactly for us to go.
No, but you just still have you just have to be very careful and think very hard about where you go to get these things.
So the Diablo arrived in 1990, and now this was the Lamborghini that I was really aware of as a boy.
Okay,
and this was, it's on sort of early video games, and I remember seeing it on posters, and maybe it was in films or something. But it was certainly the first Lamborghini that I was really aware of that really made me go, wow, look at that thing. It had a 5.7 litre to a 6 litre engine, 490 to around 600 brake horsepower, 2,903 built. And this was the first one that was available with four-wheel drive. There were different models with four-wheel drive.
But it came out standard with four-wheel drive. It was only later when they started doing the SV.
Right, yeah.
Which was the cut price Club Sport Diablo. When rear drive came in. Yeah. So if you went and bought a Diablo in 1990 or 1991, you had no choice. It was four-wheel drive, a VT. I don't know what VT stood for, but it would have been Italian for four-wheel drive, I imagine.
But then there were rear drive variants.
There were.
And I want to talk about the sort of the legend of the scary, hairy-chested Lamborghini, because I think it's probably been eroded a little bit now, but if you spool back 10 years, they were the cars that people would sort of warn you about, and you'd have to be careful in them. And they're the sort of dangerous, scary supercars. And I remember talking to Stefan Winkelmann, who is still Lamborghini's CEO. This was on the Huracan Spider launch, probably in 2015 or something. And I said to him, that reputation, is it actually unhelpful as you're trying to scale this business and find new buyers? Because most of these people are not legendary drivers who can tame a wild animal. And so they might actually be put off by that reputation. And he said, absolutely, it's a problem for Lamborghini, which is why most of their cars have four-wheel drive, a quite safe and steady chassis balance, frankly, a lot of them. All the modern stability control systems that other cars like it have. He didn't want his cars to be known as scary and dangerous.
So it's so interesting because just turning back to the Diablo, the first Diablo I drove that I was confident in was the SV, the car that didn't have four-wheel drive.
It just felt more natural.
I never liked the VT. In fact, I once, doing a cornering shot, of course, threw a VT Roadster off a road. I mean, I guess thanks to the four-wheel drive, I was able to drive straight out of the field that I'd gone into with absolutely no damage to anything at all. But you couldn't feel the front end of the car. I can remember taking the first VT road test car on that road, which you'll know very well, up North Wales, past Lake Bala.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the best driving roads this country has to offer. And just never feeling at home in the car and just feeling one stage remote. And there's nothing to me which makes a car feel less reassuring and therefore makes me feel more at risk than a car that doesn't tell you what it's doing. Put me in an SV where suddenly, you've got proper steering feel and the car is lighter and feels so much better connected to the road. I will trust my right foot not to stick it down too hard. And then, if the car is communicating properly, to me, that's a much safer car.
Yeah, it is, if you know what the car's doing. But, I mean, that's in your hands. I wonder if let's be honest, typical Lamborghini driver's hands.
I mean, it's the 911 argument, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, do you feel safer in a two-wheel drive 911 to a four-wheel drive 911, or in a four-wheel? Would you buy a four-wheel drive 911 because you thought it was safer? I mean, my father bought a four-wheel drive 993, and I can remember saying to him, "You don't need to do this. All you're doing is adding weight. It won't drive as well. It'll be a bit slower. You don't need to do this." But in the back of his head, there was just this thing that 911s can just be a bit tricky.
Yeah.
Which, of course, by the time the 993 come along, was absolutely not the case. So I think it's much more, to me, a question of perception.
I think that's probably right, isn't it?
Than reality.
It's easier if someone is a bit nervous in the showroom about the reputation that Lamborghinis might have. A salesperson
That's
can say,
what it is.
It's got four-wheel drive.
It's got four-wheel drive.
You'll be fine.
And then they'll go, oh, phew.
Yeah.
But, of course, what that might actually make them do is think, well, I've got a four-wheel drive so I can go much faster.
Yeah. It might well do that.
And just raise the speed at which they have the accident.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I can remember that Volvo, when they started making 4x4s, never marketed it as a safety feature. A practicality feature, absolutely, but never as a safety feature. And even today, if you go to the frozen wastes of northern Finland and Sweden and see the cars that are driving around, they're not all 4x4s.
No.
They're front-wheel drive cars with really good tyres on.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Anyway, slightly off topic there.
So 2001 to 2010, Murciélago, take your pick. 6.2 to 6.5 litres, roughly 570 to 670 bhp, getting serious now, 4,099 built.
Possibly my favourite Lamborghini.
Really? I mean, that is a proper wild, angry-looking V12 Lamborghini. It looks amazing.
With every series of Lamborghinis, doesn't matter whether they have 10 or 12 cylinders, there's always been cars that I've liked and cars that I haven't liked. Apart from that one, never drove a Murciélago, which I didn't like. They were to me, they were all wonderful. I can remember we had one down at Goodwood once, and driving the wheels off it and just not wanting to get it. I felt I could do anything in that car.
Oh,
it just felt
cool.
it just handled so well.
Yeah.
Because Lamborghinis, you think they're all about the look and they're all about the power. But here was one which did the other thing as well and was just a fabulous driver's car. I adore those things. If I had to, were I so lucky, if I were lucky enough to be in a position to buy a Lamborghini, that's what I get.
Yeah.
Or a Countach. No, well, if I had a Countach, I'd be so proud to have a Countach, and I think it was absolutely wonderful. But if I had a Murciélago, I'd just use it more.
Yeah, you'd use it a lot more, wouldn't you? I've never driven one, but I think they look.
They are
fantastic.
So they are the first, in inverted commas, Audi Lamborghinis. Yeah. And I think an awful lot of what makes them so great is that Audi very cleverly took none of the magic away, but certainly in the way that the cars were built and developed and the detailing and finish, they just applied a lot more rigor to the process. And so what you got was almost a sort of Lamborghini with the benefit of hindsight. Yeah. A Lamborghini with, all the things that made you nervous about Lamborghinis in the past removed. Wonderful things. And I could get all quite sort of...
It strikes a fantastic balance from an aesthetic point of view.
That's the other thing. They're beautiful.
They are, but they still have that presence and that attitude.
But it's not just... I mean, I would not say that a Diablo is a beautiful car.
No.
I think Aventador's very good looking.
Murcielago looks far better.
I agree.
Than both of the newer ones, Aventador and Revuelto for me.
Well, definitely than the Revuelto. Definitely. So yeah, that to me, that's the one.
Excuse me, and they have those air intakes that rise up, don't they, on the flames, like horns or something. Yeah. Just a cool car. So Aventador, this is the one that I've driven the most.
Yeah.
2011 to 2022. 6.5 litre engine, 690 to 770 bhp, 11,465 produced.
So whatever we say...
Yeah, it doesn't matter, does it?
Doesn't matter, no.
That's more than the previous four combined.
The previous four, what, more than?
Miura, Countach, Diablo, Murcielago.
Combined.
Yeah.
And I was the one who, when I did the autocar road test of it, concluded, bit disappointing. Yeah. What do we know?
Well, we know what people who really, really love cars want in a supercar.
Are you saying that people who buy Lamborghinis don't really, really love cars?
No. Okay, take the Venn diagram of true car enthusiasts and people who want the look and the image and to be seen. Mm-hmm. I think there is less of an overlap when we're talking about Lamborghinis.
Okay.
Less of an overlap compared to Ferraris or McLarens, certainly.
McLaren, certainly.
I think if someone's going to buy a supercar for the look, for the image, it's probably a Lamborghini.
Yes, I wouldn't disagree with that.
And I think that's what they tapped into brilliantly with the Aventador.
Yes.
It's an easy car to drive. It's safe. It's got that annoying robotized manual paddle shift, but for most people, it's just an automatic gearbox. They get that wild styling and the big engine, but it's not a difficult thing to drive.
It's also a carbon tub.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, is probably again back in the bar. I think that's come and look at my carbon fibre. I think that's probably quite powerful.
Yeah, I think it is.
That was the first car with a new engine in it.
Yeah.
So the 670 Murciélago was the last car to have the Bizzarini engine in it, and the Aventador was the first to have the new V12 in it, and there was, at the time, you may remember this, a sort of slight concern that because this was an engine, albeit developed by Lamborghini, paid for by ultimately Volkswagen, that it would be somehow sanitized. No, it wasn't. It was fantastic.
Yeah, it was.
I can remember they launched it, or maybe I just drove it there. No, I think they launched it at Vallelunga. Italian racetrack in Italy, I think quite near Rome. I've been there a few times. And there's a corner there which is very, very fast. But the way that the Aventador was geared, you needed to do upshift through it. It's kind of like a flat corner, but you needed an upshift. And the upshift was so violent.
Oh, God.
When you were traveling at plenty miles an hour, it would destabilize the car because you were cornering while trying to pull for an upshift. Didn't appreciate that.
No.
And it was just like having a thorn in your training shoe.
Yeah.
It didn't ruin it. It just got in the way all the time, that gearbox.
Yeah.
And that's why I didn't warm to it at all. In fact, the only one that I really, really enjoyed, I'm sure you've driven this too, was the SVJ.
Okay, let me just jump in here because the first couple of Aventadors I drove, they are an experience, but as a driver's car, I found them disappointing.
Correct.
Quite flat-footed, just weirdly not that engaging. But that was the Roadster that I drove through Italy. That was the Aventador S, so an updated, revised model that I had for a few days in the UK. A bit underwhelmed by them, but then the SVJ, and I drove a couple. And it shows how much the tuning of a car, the engine, the transmission, the suspension, all that stuff, how much of a difference it makes. Because the SVJs were just another level compared to the previous ones.
It was like getting into a Black Series SLS.
Yeah.
It wasn't the fact that it was faster. The fact that it was faster was totally immaterial. It was just so much better to drive. I felt safer in it. It handled better. It was just a far superior driving experience. And what you find then, what actually happens, is the stuff that's annoyed you about those cars. Things like, well, the gearbox we've already discussed, but things like, the all-round visibility on those cars. So they're so wide and you can't really see out of them. And you and I have driven a few McLarens, which have like sort of goldfish bowl glass houses. And one of the best things about those cars is you can just see so much, which adds so much confidence when you're on a good road. Those sort of things, when you've got a car which really handles and really goes and really connects, they become less important. So it's not just the good stuff that they've added, but the bad stuff is somehow not as bad, even though it still is, because that's not what you're thinking about, because you're just thinking, thank goodness they finally sorted this car. SVJ, Aventador, cracking thing.
I remember driving.
But why did we have to wait?
Yeah. It should have been like that from the beginning.
Of course.
The flagship Lamborghini should be like that. I remember driving the Roadster version, probably on the same road in North Wales that you mentioned earlier, and getting out after driving reasonably briskly, just quivering.
Yes.
Just shaking with the sort of adrenaline and excitement of it all.
That's what a Lamborghini experience should be, isn't it?
If any car should do that to you.
Any car should make you quiver. That'd be a good advertising liner. Makes you quiver.
We don't get adverts like that for cars like these anymore.
Funnily enough. No.
But absolutely, it should be a V12 Lambo. I also drove one on ice in Italy.
Wow.
One of those ice driving things that they do. And
tell me you buried it in a snowdrift.
I don't think I did that one. I certainly found my way into a snowdrift in one of the other cars, but I don't think in that. The lovely thing about the V12 cars, so the V10 cars on ice, they're like live wires. They're super agile, and
they flick.
The engine's so responsive,
yes.
And the transmission, the four-wheel drive, moves the torque around so fast. They're like rally cars, like four-wheel drive rally cars. But the V12 ones, they didn't have the engine response, so you really had to wind them up. They were bigger, heavier cars, but also sort of lazier, and there's much more of a pendulum effect. And I found that more fun, manipulating all that weight. The Scandi flicks in, the big drifts out, drifting from one side to the other, and you're going at 20 miles an hour or something, but you feel like a hero. And on the ice, the SVJ was so much fun. Just loved it.
So the next time you're feeling a bit down about anything at all, just look in the mirror and say, I've driven an Aventador SVJ on ice.
There you go. It's not all bad, is it?
How much? We can't bang on about, because it sounds smug how lucky we've been, but just to have had that experience, which I've never had.
Yeah.
I've driven a mid-engine Clio on ice. That was quite good fun.
Oh, I'm sure. Did you manage to hold it in a drift?
Sort of. Okay. that did go into a snowdrift while I was in it, but I felt better about the fact because Patrick Tombe was driving it at the time.
There you go.
And he stuck it in a snowdrift. So if Patrick Tombe can stick it in a snowdrift, and I don't feel bad about doing it at the time. It was great fun. But I've driven 911 turbos on ice and that sort of thing.
Oh, that'd be good.
That was nice. I did stick one of those in the snowdrift.
Yeah. Well, it happens.
Porsche thought it was terribly funny. Yeah, gosh, what a privilege to be able to do that.
It's fortunate, isn't it? Okay, so the most recent in the line, Revuelto, 2023, that car was new, 6.5 litre V12, now with 3 motors. Mm-hmm. So the first hybrid one, 1,001 bhp.
Yes.
And you drove it in Wales recently.
Mm-hmm.
What do the motors add? Apart from a shed load of power.
It's interesting. So the engine now, the 6.5 litre engine, which Lamborghini claims to be new, is now producing all by itself about 815 horsepower.
Yeah.
Which is a lot for a naturally aspirated. That's the point. That's the point about all these Lamborghinis, is they've never gone down the turbo route or anything else. Anyway, so that's doing that. And then the E-motors, the 3 of them, bump that up to just over 1,000 horsepower. But the car, I think, weighs about 200 kilos more than an Aventador. So what are they bringing? They bring the ability, and this is, I think, a really important benefit, to get in the car at 4:30 in the morning and be way long gone out of the village before anybody hears it. And as somebody who lives on the outskirts of a small village and has cringed at times when I've had to creep past my neighbours' houses.
I know the feeling.
In some ridiculous machine. I really appreciate that. It also means that when you come home, because you can use the engine to charge the battery when you're on the road, you can also have a full charge, when you get on your way back and you're close to the village again, and then you can just shut everything down and cruise home, which is great. I'm sure it makes difference to claimed fuel consumption figures and CO2, but I can't imagine anybody interested in paying 350,000 quid for a Lamborghini is going to be too concerned about that, but it might help Volkswagen's corporate emissions figures. Don't know. It obviously provides 4-wheel drive.
Yeah. So that's how it's 4-wheel drive, is it?
So that's how it's 4-wheel. So the E-motors drive the front wheel.
Yeah.
It's difficult to say without driving one without, but personally, I would be very surprised if you took all that stuff off the car and just let it run free if the result wasn't better to drive. It would be. Really? Because, the power to weight ratio wouldn't be that different because you'd save yourself all those hundreds of kilograms. You'd still have a naturally aspirated V12 engine. I guess one point you could make is you might have to wind back the V12 a little bit, because one of the jobs the hybrid does is it allows a very high state of tune for the ICE engine, because the hybrid can fill in the gaps in the torque curve that produces. So you might have to wind that back to, 750 horsepower. I mean, it still doesn't sound too terrible, does it? No. And, it's like the SF90, which I guess is the car's closest rival, albeit with 8 rather than with 12 cylinders. Every time I've driven an SF90, particularly since I've driven the 296, which doesn't have 4-wheel drive, I just think to myself how much nicer that car would be without the driven front axle. Now, one thing that Lamborghini does do, which Ferrari doesn't, is it provides a decent amount of luggage space up the front despite the 4-wheel drive. And I guess that's because it's electric motors rather than drive shafts and having to run some kind of shaft from the engine all the way through to the front wheels and that sort of thing. So maybe that's just a cleverer way of doing it. So I don't know. I haven't driven a rear-wheel drive Revuelto because it doesn't exist. But I mean, I think it'll be like the Diablo. I think I can't see net anything but good coming of it. But I might be wrong.
And so, did you like the car? I know in the story that you wrote, which is on the app and website now, you talk about it finally making sense when you sort of press on a bit. But did you love it, or was it not quite the Lamborghini you wanted?
In many ways it was. I don't particularly like the way that it looks, particularly from the sort of the front 3/4. I like the fact that it's a lot more usable. It really is much easier to use than most historic Lamborghinis because the visibility is better and because the switchgear is better. So it puts up fewer barriers. It's also pretty good if you're just stooging about. It's quite quiet. The ride is okay. If you just drive it sort of in a conventionally sort of enthusiastic way, you will wonder what the point is. Because there are so many other cars out there that do that sort of thing so well. And I think you'd just be sitting there thinking, I'd rather be in a GT3, costing a third of the money or whatever. But there is a moment, because that V12 really does spin to 9,000 RPM, on a certain sort of road, a certain sort of very quiet road, probably even a track, where having a howling, naturally aspirated V12 behind you in a Lamborghini, and suddenly you're putting some loads into the suspension and the car feels like it is coming alive. When it does do something different, and it's a very subjective thing, because I'm quite certain that in any objective measure, something like a 750S McLaren would dust it. Yeah. A 750S, despite having 740 horsepower instead of 1,000, 750S is so much lighter. It's got a better power to weight ratio, all the same. There is a certain sort of, it's almost back to the bedroom wall. There is almost a sort of like a childlike magic that this car, it takes you to a place where you're there, you've got the V12 screaming its lungs out behind you, and it might not even feel really, really good, but it feels very, very special.
Yeah, which it should. That's the moment that we're looking for in these cars.
And that's the moment when suddenly you actually think, I can see it. I can see why, in a completely different world, why this car is worth it to drive.
Okay, that's good to hear, because I think as we've discovered through this episode, as we've worked our way through these different models, that's what we're looking for in the driving experience, isn't it? That moment of excitement.
That's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
It may not be what Lamborghini customers are looking for.
But that moment where you just go, oh my God, this is almost overwhelming. And the one that's done that the most for me is the Aventador SVJ. But clearly the best V12 Lamborghinis do that.
I would rather drive an Aventador SVJ, even with that gearbox, than a Revuelto. Even though I think the Revuelto is a very good example of its art. And I'm not at all surprised that it's already sold out all the way through 2026.
Oh, it's interesting. These are cool cars. These are about as exciting as they get, or at least they should be. That's the point of a V12 Lamborghini.
We have missed quite a few V12 Lamborghinis. There's Lero, Espada, Harama.
We have, yeah.
And what's the one? LM002.
Yeah, I've driven one of those.
Have you? So
yes.
have I. Gosh.
Again, I drove it on ice.
There can't be many podcasts in the UK where both presenters have driven LM002s.
No.
I'm quite proud of that.
I think we might be the only one.
You drove an LM002 on ice? Oh my God.
Well, it was on the same trip.
Okay, I'm going to retire.
Maybe on an icy... No, I wasn't skidding it around at all. I was just holding on, trying not to crash.
I didn't know you'd driven one. Was it as terrible as the one I drove?
Yeah, awful. Awful.
But brilliantly awful.
Yeah. And not very fast.
No, it wasn't fast at all.
And there's also things like the Reventon and the Cyan and the...
The Reventon was just a rebodied Aventador, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
I drove one of those. It's an Aventador. Move on.
Okay, fine. So you're right. There are lots of V12 Lamborghinis.
There was the Sesto Elemento.
Yeah, that one as well.
That was a pure track car, though, wasn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, we're focusing on the main ones, but we're done. So you can choose one to have at home. I think you're going to say Countach.
Is it part of a collection? Is it a pure toy?
Yeah.
I think, although I haven't driven it, I think it's what I describe as a Harry Metcalf Countach, a 48 valve, a Quattro Valvole.
Yeah.
An anniversary.
That's the one.
That's the late Countach. It's either that or it's a Murciélago.
I might have a Miura just because I would cruise around it in it slowly.
Certainly, if you're looking for one to sell to finance the rest of your car collection, you'd definitely have a Miura.
It's a Miura.
You'd have an SVJ Miura.
I think for the look of it it might be a Miura. Anyway, we'll wrap that one up, but there you go. Lamborghini V12s, special cars. Thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for watching, if that's what you're doing. And I'll remind you that if you subscribe to the Intercooler now, and if you choose an annual subscription, you can use coupon code POD20 to get 20% off for the first year. And doing so gives you full and unlimited access to our online car magazine. It gives you this podcast ad-free. It gives you a new midweek podcast that's only for subscribers. And it gives you audible versions of our award-winning articles as well. A whole package of stuff that we think is really worthwhile. There'll be a link in the show notes, or just head to the-intercooler.com. Please go and do that. And we'll be back with another episode next week.
See you then.